All right, we're three after. I'm going to start things up here. Thank you, everyone, for uh, jumping on for today's webinar. It's titled Ideas from the University of Liverpool, Matching Assessments to the Context. And we'll hear all about that today. But first, just some housekeeping before we start. Here's kind of the way that we'll work through today's webinar. You'll meet our presenters, myself and Jessica, and then we'll hear from you guys. So we have a quick little survey that we'll distribute while I do a little bit of a short slide or two before I introduce Jessica. And then she'll do her presentation on her side, matching assessments to the context. And then I'll end it off with a little bit of a explanation about assessment without compromise, how we envision that here at Digital Ed, followed by some Q&A. So on that note, when it comes to Q&A, there is a Q&A window in your Zoom toolbar. So next to the chat, there's Q&A. This is where throughout the presentation, throughout the webinar, if you have any questions that you want to ask, feel free to type them directly into the Q&A window. We'll save those to the very end, and myself or Jessica will be sure to respond to them live then on the webinar itself. Now, if we can't get to them because there's too many questions, then we will reach out to you then afterwards through email, or we'll set up a separate Zoom session to respond to your question that you have. And again, those questions that you put them in the Q&A window of your Zoom, and myself or Jessica will respond to them at the end of the webinar. So let's meet our presenters today. So for today, our star of the show is Jessica Banks from the University of Liverpool. A little bit about her. So Jessica has taught university math in a range of different contexts over the last 16 years. Since 2019, she has been part of the Mathematics Center for Enhancement in Education in the Department of Mathematical Sciences at the University of Liverpool. Jessica's academic background is in pure mathematics, but she currently teaches operational research. Her roles within the department span e-learning, assessment, and curriculum design. So that's Jessica. You'll hear from her a lot today during the webinar, which is great because she has a lot to share. As for myself, so I'm a seasoned product marketer in the field of education technology. I boost a rich experience spanning over 15 years now with EdTech. My journey has been marked by a dedication to helping schools and teachers and students just excel in STEM courses. Now, I should be clear, my background actually as well, I studied mathematics in university. My background was in pure mathematics and combinatoric optimization. So I can really appreciate what Jessica is doing right now at the University of Liverpool. So that's me. But while it's on me, let's hear from you. So I do have a few things I wanted to ask people. If you look in your Zoom, I'm going to just push this out here. Just give me 1 second as I try to talk at the same time. So you'll see now on your screens three questions that you have access to. And the first is a true or false or a yes and no question, two options. And then the question 2 and 3 are multiple choice questions with 4 options. So feel free to review them and respond to them. And what I'll do is while Jessica is doing her presentation, I'll prepare the results and share them with everyone again at the very end. But while you're filling out that survey or that poll, if you would, what do we say when we mean online assessment? Um, in times past, it may have only meant a single type of online assessment or a type of homework, if you would. But in my conversations with educators and teachers and practitioners at different types of higher education, uh, facilities, I've heard different things. I've heard they want to have some type of ungraded practice, anonymous practice, study practice resources. Obviously, I've heard homework assignments. This could be weekly, typically, I heard, and especially those introductory courses, weekly assignments that they do online at home, remotely, wherever they are. Just they get it on Monday, it's due on Friday, for example, those homework assignments they do. Or it could be some type of, I would call more quiz, test, midterm, final exam, some type of summative assessment that they have to, do after a period of time that assesses, okay, do they know what we've tried to teach them over the past several weeks or months? Or it could be, really high stakes project exam environment. And I would argue that kind of blends with the final exam midterm environment. It could be placement testing. Especially in North America, placement testing is a thing where you typically have universities and colleges, students will complete a placement test before they start their studies because the result of the placement test tells the student the level of mathematics they're ready for in university or college. Could be adaptive testing, which we've heard about a lot in the last 5 to 10 years. Some type of mastery assignment where they have to meet certain outcomes before they complete it, or other things, more corner cases, niche things that we've heard. I mean, really, when I have heard at least online assessment, it's meant a whole bunch of different things on the spectrum. But what I have seen is that what's needed is a bunch of things potentially. Again, these are things that I have heard from educators like yourselves over the last several years about what they need. And I won't go through each one individually, but it's typically the general things you'd expect, how things look on the screen, number of attempts, a time limit, and so forth. But then it goes further. It's how they schedule something, the timing that's available, or the feedback that's available, or when things are given or not given to a student. It's the access conditions. It's controlling when students are able to actually open up certain assessments online based off previous work or previous attempts at certain things. It's security features. It's making sure that we maintain student integrity during the testing process and how we can do that through a platform or through a service. Controlling the feedback. And when feedback, you often think, oh, it's the score they receive after they complete the assignment, or it's the solutions that they may or may not see when they complete it and submit it. But there's also during the assessment. Do they receive hints? Is it a stepwise type of process where they solve a question step by step and so forth? And then there's templates. I mean, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of opportunity here for tweaking how we deliver online assessment. Is there some way to make it easier than to craft and deliver online assessment in bulk, where you don't have to define these properties every time, but you can use tools to help it understand what you're trying to achieve, and it can give you the best suggestions or the best templates to get that done. So with that in mind, there's obviously a lot of things here. I'm going to pass things now over to Jessica, who's going to share her screen and give you her background of how they match their assessments to the context. So Jessica, let's just take a minute here. I'm going to stop sharing, and you should have the permission not to do it yourself on your end.
Hello, everyone. So I'm going to talk about the various assessment options that are available in Möbius and how we're using those in Liverpool in a variety of different ways. In terms of where we're going, I don't have a formal structure to my talk. I'm just going to take you for a wander, or if I'm honest, possibly jog might be more the correct term. For a starting point, let's think about the ideal situation. So here is an example of a question that asks for the cross product of two vectors. The students are presented with two vectors. They enter their answer as a vector, which Möbius then checks. What makes this so ideal? Well, the key point is that this question is completely general, at least from the point of view of questions that we're likely to actually want to use in the learning process. By this, I mean, firstly, that having seen this Möbius question before doesn't give any unintended clues about what the answer might be next time round. Also, this question assesses exactly what I want to assess. If I'm convinced that a student can answer this question reliably, then they've met the intended learning outcome. What that means is that I can happily give the students an unlimited amount of practice at this Möbius question, knowing that I can still safely use it again later if I want to test them on it. One way of giving students access to this is in what Möbius called a lesson. With this, students will have two buttons that they can access after they've answered the question. First one, try another, enables them to generate a new randomized variant of the question to try. They can keep generating as many question variants as they want. The other button, how did I do, will cause Möbius to check their answer and provide feedback. There are different options you can choose to control the behavior here. So you can set it to show the full feedback. You can decide a student's going to be shown a correct answer, or if they're not, how many times can they check their answer for an individual question variant. One piece of advice from me here is, if you're trying something you've not done before, test it out yourself before giving students access, just to make sure that the behavior is what you're expecting. When you've got lots of choices available, there are some choices you can make that don't really make a lot of sense and could just end up annoying the students. Lessons are good for situations where you want to combine practice questions with teaching materials. For example, the operational research module that I teach is taught in a flipped classroom format, with the pre-class materials on Möbius. Another example is some self-directed resources that we have for students who have missed the statistics content that is now core in the A-level syllabus, maybe because they are mature students or from overseas, or indeed for any students who would just like a refresher. If you're using an assignment rather than a lesson, there are various different assignment types you can use. For unlimited attempts, one option is the study session assignment type. This presents questions to the students one at a time in a random order. This means it's good for a situation where, say, the students have already learnt a number of different methods, say for differentiating a function or something like that, and they need to practice identifying which method to use for which question. This assignment type also gives students easy access to hints and solutions after every question. So that's useful for earlier in the learning process with a smaller number of questions. If, however, you want to control the order that the questions are presented in, then you want the anonymous practice type. So here, a set number of questions are presented to the students, which are then graded as a whole. The order of the questions is pretty much fixed, but you do have the option of creating question groups. These allow you to either to randomize the order of questions within a set of similar questions, or to select a subset from a larger question pool. We often use this in situations where it's easier to code multiple questions, sort of different variants, rather than trying to write one piece of code for a question where either the format of the question or the solution varies. This is an example from one of our statistics modules. When you're setting up assignments, you need to think about how you want or expect students to engage with the feedback. There's no point giving students practice questions without access to solutions. That will just give you grumpy students. But if they can access feedback and they have unlimited attempts at the assignment, that means in practice they can, if they want, get to the feedback after each individual question they do. It's just that the process for doing so is a lot more cumbersome. Having students spending time just navigating through the system isn't going to be a good use of the time for learning. And so for that reason, in some cases, we've decided to use lessons to present practice problems, even if there aren't any sort of teaching resources that, or like, yeah, lecture note type things that go along with them. There are still reasons, though, where you might want to present students with a specific block of questions. One of those is if they're preparing for a specific assessment. In our module where our students first meet group theory, we have a class test that's completed on Möbius. And this is again a situation where the question types are mostly quite general. And so students have access to most of the question types in advance to practice from. By presenting these as a whole block, it allows the students to become familiar with the structure and the timing of the specific assessment, as well as with the content that it assesses. Another situation is where it matters what order you do the questions in. So this is a sequence of questions on function notation that builds up from simple cases that the students should be familiar with through to more complex ones that they may not be able to answer until they've engaged with the earlier questions. Sorry. If instead of anonymous assignments, you want to keep records of what the students have done, then usually you want the homework or quiz type. This is what I think of as the standard type of assignment. Why keep records? Well, obviously the most common reason is that you want to assign grades at the end based on how the students did. But there are other reasons that you might also want to do so. If you've got some newly written questions, it can be useful to be able to see what's happened in situations where students report a bug to you. You can also access item statistics, which tell you about how well the different questions are distinguishing between different levels of student achievement. You may want to be able to monitor the students' engagement, even if it's not contributing towards their grade, in order to help identify students who might need some additional support. And if you've got a student who's stuck on a topic, being able to see what answers they put in before can be helpful in trying to understand what it is that they've misunderstood. You might not want to give students an unlimited number of attempts at a question. I started from this example of a general question on cross product of vectors. In fact, what I said isn't exactly true, although it could have been. If you're paying particularly close attention, you may have spotted that, in fact, both of the vectors have a 0 in their third coordinate, which gives the answer a particularly simple form. This is good for controlling the difficulty of the homework assignment that the question is part of, but it means that giving the students lots of access to this particular Möbius question would not be helpful. In this case, having seen the question before does give you additional information when if you're trying to answer it again. In this case, coding the sort of general version of the question is realistic. In some areas of maths, that's not the case. So it can be that it's only appropriate to give students a limited number of attempts at questions, typically 1 or 2 attempts. The homework or quiz type also has some options in Möbius that aren't available for the other types. You can randomize the order of the questions for the whole assignment, even if they're not worth the same number of marks as each other. I could imagine using this maybe in something like a physics lab environment where there are different tasks for students to do, and that they might need to use some physical resources in order to do the tasks. And so you might want to randomize the order to avoid all the students trying to access the same resources at the same time. Giving students the option to create a hard copy of their individual assignment and giving them multiple attempts at the same question variant are both things I consider in a situation where there's a small number of questions, but each question takes a relatively large amount of work to complete. So I've used both of these, for example, when teaching engineering students about eigenvalues and eigenvectors. Another option is to retain correct answers between repeat attempts at the same assignment, so that students only need to reattempt questions that they got wrong. Sorry, that's popped up. This only holds for questions where the students have got full marks for the whole question, not for individual subparts of the question. If a new set of random parameters has been generated, then the answers for the subparts will probably change. So it doesn't make sense to retain the students' answers from those. You might, however, want the students to demonstrate that they can do each question type more than once. And one option for doing that is what's called the mastery assignment type. And the way this works is that you organize questions into groups, and the students are presented with questions one at a time, which are then immediately graded after they've entered their answer. And you set how many questions the students need to answer from each type of question, how many they need to answer correctly in order to progress through the assignment. We use this, for example, in a first-year module that I wrote for the maths students when they first start their program. The module is it functions as an introduction to university-style maths. It covers some key skills for mathematics students. The mastery assignment tests the sort of foundational ideas that it's really important that all of the students know to make sure that they're ready to engage with the rest of their studies. If you're interested in hearing more about this, there's a conference talk that I gave in the summer of 2020 talking about this assignment and particularly about the different types of questions that are used in that assignment. Another route for kind of directing students to focus on material they need to practice is what in Möbius are called, oh, apologies, let me go back. So the settings for the mastery assignment, you can put some restrictions on the order in which the students complete the questions, but you can also set penalties for incorrect answers, increasing the number of correct answers that the students need to give. I think this is a good mechanism to disincentivize guessing, particularly in situations where I'm using multiple choice questions. As I started saying, there's another method of directing students in terms of what they keep practicing is what in Möbius is called advanced policies. So these allow you to control access to assignments based on what the student has or hasn't done in the past. I talked earlier about giving students access to hints and solutions. That's really useful early in the learning process. And if you've got mature, motivated students, they may be able to limit themselves in terms of what they access once their understanding is improved, when it's better for them to attempt questions unaided. But research shows that this is not always the case. Students often struggle with the self-awareness and the self-discipline needed to make the best use of resources that they have available to them. They may intentionally or otherwise choose to use things like access to solutions to avoid learning, or they may stick with material they feel comfortable with rather than moving on to more complex material. Advanced policies used to be used in our operational research module. As I said before, this is taught in a flipped classroom approach. The students could gain early access to the homework questions by completing the online preparatory work, providing a carrot for them to get on and do it. On the other hand, once they had demonstrated they could do the sort of computational questions, they would then be locked out of that assignment to give them a reminder that they should be moving on to look at the more theoretical content. Over the last few years, we've changed our approach to assessment within the department, moving to sort of fewer higher weighted assessment points. That's had some real advantages. For example, being able to schedule the assessments in a way that to avoid deadline clashes. But it does mean that this particular approach that no longer fits with the module structure. Unsurprisingly, the more common method that we use for controlling access to assignments is start and end dates. An important option here is the ability to restrict feedback until a specific date, which is usually a few days after the submission deadline. Even if each student only sees one question variant, the solutions may still give extra information to students who haven't yet submitted their answer. So it's often not appropriate to release the feedback until after all the students have submitted their work. You can choose to set the start and end dates relatively far apart, giving students plenty of time to complete the assignment, or you can set them close together, say an hour apart, if you want to test that you want all the students to sit simultaneously. Another option is to set a time limit for the students that fixes how long they have to complete the assignment from the point they first open it. We use this in a couple of different ways. In a complex analysis module, for example, we have an assignment where the students need to complete within an hour, but they can choose when in the week to do that. So that allows them to choose a time that's appropriate for them, not only fitting around their lectures, but also other commitments, such as caring responsibilities or employment, or indeed any health requirements. On the other hand, in a financial mathematics module, we have a class test that, for academic integrity purposes, we want the students to sit simultaneously. But in practice, trying to find a time that fits around the collective lecture timetable of all the students can be somewhat tricky. So we decided to use a time limit within a slightly larger window set by the start and end dates. So that provided a little bit of wiggle room to allow for some students coming from other classes immediately beforehand, and then some other students going on to classes immediately afterwards. If you want more control over what the students can access during the tests, then there's an option for proctored assessments. For academic integrity purposes, the gold standard would be to have invigilated proctored tests on campus. One of our lecturers in environmental sciences has used this in a module on human geography that they teach. One lesson we learned from this is that it's quite easy for students to lock themselves out of the test. Things like switching to a different window that you can't do during the test are things they do in everyday life all the time. And so they will happen just out of sheer habit. So we found that you need to have enough people around to let them back into the test, at least when they first start doing assignments of this type. However, the major limitation for proctored exams is access to computer rooms on campus. For us, while the number of computers that we can use for teaching is increasing, so is demand. You get the best use of randomized assessments when you're dealing with big classes. But here in maths, we're often looking at class sizes in the hundreds, and that means that getting access to computer rooms just isn't realistic in some situations. An alternative would be if all the students had access to a device that they could use in a standard lecture theatre. We're not at the point yet where we can rely on that. Although I think that will probably become more of a realistic option in the future. One idea I've been thinking about recently would be to have something that operates a bit like a test centre. So the context that I'm thinking about here is where the students coming onto a particular programme have a range of different academic backgrounds, meaning that each of them knows some of the material they need to know, but that different students are familiar with different topics. Teaching them in a traditional style would mean going too fast for each student some of the time and too slow at other times. It would be better to allow the students to pace the learning themselves, so that they can demonstrate quite early the areas that they're familiar with, and then focus for the remaining time on material that they're not so familiar with. Having sort of getting the students, so the students would be able to practice as much as they want, but then at some point they would have to pick a time and say, okay, I'm ready to sit the test on this material. Getting them to choose when to sit a summative assessment rather than just giving them unlimited attempts might be enough to bring sort of the practicalities within what we can actually do in terms of running invigilated tests. It also has a different impact on what the students are motivated to learn. If the grade is just the final mark that the students get from multiple attempts, then the focus is really on the marks. They can just keep going until they're happy with the mark that they've got and then stop. If instead the students have to commit to accepting the mark from a particular attempt before they know what that mark is, then that pushes the emphasis back onto how well they understand the material, which of course is where we would like it to be. That brings us roughly back to where we started, so I shall stop here. One more tip from me before I finish. There are lots of options that you can use to adapt assignments to fit different contexts. Just don't try to use too many of them at the same time. If you've got questions for me, please put them in the Q&A and we'll get to them in a bit. First, I will hand back over to Johnny.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. Yeah, there are a few questions that came through, but I'll just finish up with our slides for now. Again, if you do have any, put them in the Q&A window. You have a few minutes before we get to the Q&A section. So let me just pick up from where Jessica just left off. And that's just to kind of tie up the loose end here with Möbius. Obviously, what Jessica was referring to, they do use Möbius and she uses it for delivering her assessments. So if you're not familiar or you haven't seen it in action, the whole point is that Möbius allows you to deliver your STEM homework and assessments the way you want to. You don't have to make any compromises. So like I showed you that previous slide, whether it's quick anonymous practices or some type of major exam or something in between, you can design your assignments exactly how you want them. Not only that, but with Möbius, you can build your content from scratch, your questions, full control over them. You can also utilize pre-made resources to help you make your content. What Jessica highlighted there, we do have about 53 or 55 assignment settings for how you want to deliver your assessment. So you can tweak them and adjust them, turn them on or off, depending on the option. All these different things you can do to really tweak how you deliver that homework in Möbius. And of course, everything's graded for you. So let Möbius handle that grading for you. It's flexible, powerful, saves you time. And what else on top of that? Of course, automatic grading, like I already mentioned before. Results and data is stored in the Möbius gradebook. So you can always review results, fine-tune your reports, control over the grades. You can manually change them if you have to, override them, regrade material, annotate material, create your reports, export them into Excel or CSV file format. The gradebook is a very versatile tool that helps you see what you need to see. Then there's the analytics engine. We do provide you with pre-built dashboards and visualizations and insights into how your students are consuming and performing with your content. That's also available with Möbius. So with that, I want to just close off our presentation today. I did ask 3 survey questions, and I was able to pull up the results while Jessica was presenting. So I'll go through each one and I'll just show the results. I'm not going to, decipher or tell you what my thoughts are. Just here's the results for you to see. So of everyone here, 59 people responded, just to give you a heads up. So keep that in mind with the sample size. But the first question was, do you currently use online resources for delivering assessments to your students? And overwhelmingly, most people did say yes. And you can see that here in the responses. There were a few people who still are haven't yet committed to using online, resources for assessments. Perhaps I'm assuming they're still using pen and paper, but that was the response for question one. Question two and three was, related to what's important for instructors and students. So the first one is, what is most important for you when delivering assessments online? And there were four options. The options was automatic grading of student submissions, the ability to generate randomized or algorithmic content, pre-made content that can use out of the box, or the fourth option was an accessible and equitable solution. And that last option there was the leader with the most votes. At the bottom was pre-made content that I can use out of the box. So it seems that's least important, meaning, obviously that's not as important as the other options. And then right in the middle there, not too far behind an accessible and equitable solution, was a tie between automatic grading and the ability to generate algorithmic content. So some interesting results right there. And the last question was, what do you feel is most important to your students when it comes to online assessments? And far behind, with only 3 votes of 59, was have the option to complete their assessments on their mobile device, was the least important. Second least important was the ability to complete the homework remotely. Then after that was being able to complete assessments without technical issues. That was about 24% of the votes, but then leading the pack with a overwhelmingly 56% was having accurate grading that includes helpful feedback was the most important thing that you felt your students cared about. So yeah, there you go. Those are the 3 results. Again, I think we can probably share these results and afterwards we'll follow up with you with a nice email that kind of summarizes that. But there are some Q&A questions. So Jessica, I'm going to shift gears here. I have a few questions that came through that I'm going to just go through. So the first one I'll bring up, and you can kind of give your thoughts, Jessica, on what you think. I've merged 2 questions, by the way, from the audience. So as we shift to embracing AI within our education, our assessment and teaching, how has this affected your assignment delivery through Möbius, or even what are you planning to integrate within your courses to utilize, AI alongside Möbius? And even further is, are you concerned about students using tools like ChatGPT or AI to copy and paste responses to questions? So it's kind of a big question, but just want your thoughts in general. How do you feel about AI in the classroom and with Möbius?
I guess part of it, the types of question that Möbius is best at being able to deal with are often more on the sort of computational side of things, not always. But actually, we've already had Wolfram Alpha around for years. So sort of having AI around to answer questions isn't actually really a new thing so much for us in maths. And that's kind of part of why having sort of variation in questions is important. But it is also a challenge. We have some of our questions, for example, in group theory, the way that you kind of word the question can affect how well a computer program can identify what it is that needs to be done. Indeed, in pure maths, often like the working out how to translate the question is most of the question part. But yeah, there will still be lots of things that certainly I haven't got my head around yet. We are starting to look at different things incorporating AI, but they don't tend to be the same assignments that we use Möbius for, at least at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Jessica. I would even, from my perspective too, on this whole conversation around AI, ChatGPT, even before this, like you mentioned, there was Wolfram Alpha or just Google or other resources students had to, try to find answers or solutions, for example. At the end of the day, our perspective on AI is how can we use AI to help educators develop more sophisticated resources? That's where our mind is at digital ed. I would also argue that digital ed, through Mobius has resources to help mitigate, lack of better words, these options for students to get answers elsewhere, right? And that's using algorithmic content, it's using proctored environments, it's using, resources to help lock down the environment. So things like that. But it'll always be that conversation is, okay, there's this new technology out there that students could potentially abuse. How do we handle that? And it's an ongoing conversation, and it's just encouraging student academic integrity at the end of the day. Um, I can answer this question here that came through, but it was, can we create a report format assessment in Mobius? I'm assuming you mean a long form answer, an essay. And the answer is yes. So Mobius does support that. It also automatically then will highlight and annotate certain keywords or phrases that are in the response. Instructors can then, of course, review those responses and provide further commentary or annotations or grades on that. But yes, we do support a report format or long form assessment in Mobius. Another question, Jessica, more for your side, and I can give you my thoughts as well afterwards. But what kind of introduction to Mobius do you provide for students as they start their studies? As you use Mobius in different ways, it is important for the students to be familiar with the platform Mobius so they can concentrate on the subject matter without having to pay attention to how to, use Möbius itself. So do you have any type of resources that you give to students ahead of time to prepare themselves, or what are your thoughts on that, Jessica?
Yeah, so we do have an assignment that we created. It used to be called practice assignment, and then we discovered that that conflicted quite badly with everything else that we call practice assignment. So I've renamed it as how to use Möbius. So that's sort of a sequence of questions that just focuses on the kind of practicalities of, in particular, entering answers in different types of answer box. Also, we don't, you don't run a high stakes class test as the first thing that you do. We make sure that the students are either seeing Möbius first in sort of practice environments where the marks don't count, or where they've got quite a lot of time to come and ask help and things like that. Particularly with the first couple of assignments, we're sort of quite make sure that there's routes available for them to ask if they've got stuck. But I think also I'd say for the most part, the complexity lies on the teacher's side rather than on the student side. If you're looking at a thing that has one button that says try another and one that says how did I do, most students do manage to identify those without needing any specific support as far as we can tell. The kind of complexity is more as the teacher how you're going to set up all the different options, but then there are exceptions, but most of the time we've not had significant problems from the students with understanding how to navigate through the system.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff and Jessica. So even from our perspective, we do provide to institutions, a student readiness assessment they can take prior to their studies. It's an interactive assignment that walks them through how to use Möbius. We also have a full support section on digitaled.com that walks them through it. It's a task-oriented support section, so they can look up how to do certain things on the platform. Along with that, we also have a live chat feature where they can chat with digital ed to get immediate responses on how to do certain things on the platform, how to log in, how to access courses, how to navigate through assignments. So we've definitely put a lot of effort into ensuring that students have a smooth um, onboarding themselves to the platform, right? Because to your point, to the user asked this question, students should be focusing on the material being asked. They shouldn't be focused on how do I use the platform. So we've put a lot of effort into making sure that students have a smooth transition into using Mobius. Um, we have time for one more question, Jessica. I'm going to let you answer this as well, just from your perspective, because it's more for you. So, at what levels do you use Mobius or even online assessments with with this automatic grading? Like, I guess the question is it for pre-honors courses? Is it for honors, master's material? Do you use Mobius to assess high-level cognitive skills, or is it more basic skills and knowledge? Like, how do you use it yourself is what they're asking.
So we do, we're a maths department. We're teaching students who have come specifically onto a mathematics degree program. So for us, the sort of things that we use it for are concentrated in our first 2 years. We use Möbius for quite a large proportion of our first year modules and not quite as many, but quite a lot of our second year modules. Now that's partly because of kind of what tasks we're expecting students to do at what point in their mathematics. So some of the things that we're testing at those points might occur at different points in a different degree program. We do also have a smaller number of modules that we've used it for in our third year. Currently, we don't have any beyond that, but in partly that's that it is more difficult to design, but also that we have smaller classes at that point, and it's not worth the kind of input. In terms of what sorts of things you use it to assess, so it's most naturally straightforward to use for the more sort of computational things where you can give students a new set of numbers repeatedly. But we do use it in other situations. And indeed, probably the video that I mentioned of my previous talk, I was sort of particularly thinking about how I've tried to use it for sort of more pure maths. So it does require more thought for certain types of maths. Also, so one of my colleagues said recently, you don't want to just start with the paper-based assignment that you've got and try and reproduce that in an online setting. Some of that will work, but also that you kind of need to think instead, start from what can I do with the options that are available to me, and how would I use that to assess the content. The kind of questions that I use, indeed the way that I create those questions, does vary quite a lot depending on which content it is that we're looking at. But you can't do everything with this. Someone asked about the kind of write the first line. We're not at the stage where computers can really assess that. What we can do is use the computer to assess the things it can, and that frees up the human time to then focus on the bits that you need a human for. So we do have some of our assessments are hybrid. We have some questions that are on Möbius, and then some questions that are human marked. on digital paper. You want to use the tool that suits the question as best you can.
Mhm.
And I don't know, maybe we will get to the point where AI can do all of this
Yeah.
perfectly, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks, Jessica. That was a big question, but it was a great response to it. Now, there were several other questions that we just don't have the time to get to today. So, with that, let me close things out here with some housekeeping. So, thank you for joining us today, everyone who attended. We will be sending out an email later on this week with a recording of the presentation that you can share with your colleagues, as well as just some information about the webinar, some follow-up activities. Again, if we couldn't get to your question, we will respond to you through email. Jessica, I'll loop you in when we need your thoughts and information as well for those responses to questions we couldn't get to. If you want to reach out to us, Jessica's email is there in the top right of your screen as well. Digital Ed's contact information there is in the bottom right. Again, I appreciate everyone coming, but of course, I just want to put a big thank you to Jessica for helping out today. And we are right there for time today. Perfect timing. With that, I'm going to just dismiss everybody. Hope you have a great day wherever you are in the world, and we can connect again in the future. Take care, everybody.